So we are in Daniel chapter 4, Daniel 4, and which is your reading today. We're in the book of Daniel all week, and you could probably tell by your reading that when it comes to Daniel, I love the first half of Daniel. I do not like the second half, if I'm just being honest with you, okay? So, and because if you don't know, the Daniel 1-6 is the biography of Daniel, and the Daniel 7-12 is the prophecies of Daniel. Now, it's all inspired, given us by God, and good for edification. I just don't have it figured out yet. And so I encourage you this week, read through Daniel 7-12, and I will try to do the same. Any questions you have, direct them to Danny, okay? So put Danny to work. He's been off for a few weeks. He needs a I still remember years ago, I was a young pastor, still had that young pastor spell, and we were doing some end time stuff. It was on a Sunday night. Handful of people would come out to the parsonage, and we were going through the prophecies of Daniel. And I had spent hours, and I thought I had it all figured out. And at one point I said, when you get to the 70 weeks prophecy, I said, look, each week equals 7 years. And one of our ladies says, preacher, that makes no sense. And I said, I know. Moving on, right? That's about as good as I can give it to you. Now, I could say at the time, this is where we get this. But I'd be lying if I said I understood all of it and whatnot. So what we're doing this week in our Discipleship 180 is looking at the biography of Daniel, because as I think we'll see here tonight and then Sunday evening, Daniel fits well within the meta-narrative of Scripture. And so the themes that we've already seen, and we'll look at a big one today, we see in Daniel, and then Daniel introduces us to future themes. So for example, Daniel is perhaps best known in terms of the meta-narrative of the Bible as anticipating the Messiah. So the Son of Man language is taken from Daniel's prophecies. Jesus takes that language for himself, refers to himself frequently, I think more than any other title, as the Son of Man. And that is taken straight from Daniel. And the imagery of the Greeks and the Romans and the Medo-Persians and future Babylon, there you go, Danny, some prophecy for you. That all comes from Daniel. And so here's Jesus in the middle of the Roman Empire, the Son of Man, the Ancient of Days. So Daniel is really seen as connecting what we're reading in the Ode with what we are anticipating in Christ. But he also connects with what we've already seen in the Bible. And a really good example here is the connection and the similarities between Daniel and Joseph. This is really helpful for me this week. As I was reading through the stories, this stuck out to me. So let me show you some similarities. Both men, Joseph and Daniel, went down into exile. You remember when we did Joseph, we emphasized the exilic language, that Joseph went down into the pit. He went down into Egypt. He went down into Potiphar's house. He went down into the prison, so on and so forth. It's language of exile. And then he went up out of the prison. He went up out of slavery. It's the language of deliverance. And that, of course, is pictured as Israel going into slavery and exile and then into deliverance. So they both go down into exile. Both interpret dreams. We'll look at one of those today here in Daniel 4. Both rose to political prominence, Joseph being second in command. Daniel, we'll really see this Sunday evening with Daniel in the Lion's Den. Daniel continues to climb that political ladder. Both were falsely accused, and as a result of that accusation, were thrown into a pit. So you remember Daniel is accused of treason, right? He's not loyal to the new king, Darius. Well, Joseph is accused of abusing or committing adultery with Potiphar's wife. And as a result, they both are thrown into a pit. One is a prison, the other is an executionary pit. Finally, both foresee the deliverance of Israel and their exile. Joseph foresees the Exodus. Daniel foresees the Messiah. And remember, we can't understand the Messiah without truly understanding the Exodus. For what God does through Moses, Jesus is a true and better Moses. So Moses delivers Israel from slavery. Jesus delivers sinners from slavery. But what we get here in chapter 4, at least for our purposes this evening, is that ultimately we see in terms of application, this is a story about pride. And it is a very vivid picture of pride. And the best model for humility here, if Nebuchadnezzar represents pride, Daniel is a good picture of humility. This really stuck out to me. I was studying a little more today that Daniel is serving the man responsible for his exile, Nebuchadnezzar. General Nebi is the guy that destroyed Judah. He destroyed the temple, Solomon's temple, knocked down the Jerusalem walls. That was Nebuchadnezzar. Now he is king of Babylon. And Daniel would have been a young man who was doing fine in Judah and is sent against his will in exile to Babylon, the capital city, along with his three friends and other Jews. And yet, Daniel is able to serve under Nebuchadnezzar with honor and integrity. The only way that can be done is with humility. I think the average Christian today would struggle to accomplish what Daniel did here. Right? Well, let's start here in verses 4 to 27 with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Chapter 3 ends, and chapter 4 begins with King Nebuchadnezzar giving praise to the Jewish God following the deliverance of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Right? I trust you're familiar with the story. If not, there's a VeggieTales for that. And remember that much as Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, Daniel is now summoned to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In fact, the way they're written is very similar. Remember that Pharaoh had all of his magicians and wise men to go first. Then Joseph comes. Here, the king tries all of his magicians and his counselors, we'll see, and his wise men. And then he goes to Daniel. So the story itself plays out the same. Let's read the dream, verses 4 to 18. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. At last Daniel came in before me, he who was named Belteshazzar, this is his Babylonian name, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too difficult for you, tell me the visions of my dream that I saw and their interpretation. The visions of my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to heaven. It was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all the flesh was fed from it. A couple things to note here. Nebuchadnezzar starts, again, by talking to everyone but Daniel. I want you to notice who is numbered among them. It says there, verse 6, around there, the wise men, who include the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. So verses 6 and 7. So you have one category, his wise men, and they were on the subcategories, if I'm reading this right, the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, astrologers. Now, some of those are weird. Why would they be called Chaldeans when the early Chaldeans become Babylonians? That seems to be the theory. So the Chaldeans are introduced in Job, who's during the age of the patriarchs, but later they're called Babylonians. But nevertheless, there's something interesting here. Where in the Bible have you ever heard of the wise men? And what did the wise men do? Like what did they follow? Right? It wasn't GPS. They followed a star. They're astrologers. And they come from the east. Right? And I'm not an expert on this, but most see the Magi of Matthew 2 first introduced in the Bible in Daniel 2, 4, and 6. I think I got my chapters right. You can see then what Matthew is doing by incorporating them. You have the nations coming to the Messiah, and that the nations understand that Herod isn't king, but Jesus is king, this baby, and that God is drawing the nations to himself. Now, one of the questions is, why would the Magi, these pagan astrologers, why would they look for a Jewish Messiah? And most scholars see as Daniel being the one who introduces, as one of these wise men, introduces Jewish prophecies to them. After all, there are astrological language throughout the Bible, many of them in the context of the Messiah. I think it's Numbers that mentions the Star of Bethlehem, if you will. And that is an astrological imagery for the Messiah. So it makes sense, and I think we are very much introduced to them here. Nevertheless, Daniel was summoned in verse 8. We're reminded his name is Belteshazzar. But Nebuchadnezzar notes that Daniel has the spirit of the holy gods. Now, he's pagan, right? He's a polytheist, so we're going to expect the plurality there. But what we need to see here is that Daniel, in a foreign nation, in a foreign culture, has maintained his integrity and his godliness. And that's really what you get in the first 3 chapters of Daniel, is he and his friends. You remember what Jeremiah said? He said, look, the Babylonians are coming. They're going to send you in exile. Your job is to marry, have kids, raise godly children, and live a quiet, peaceful life. That's your job. That's what Daniel did. He lived a quiet, peaceful life, an eventful life, an adventurous life, and one in politics nonetheless. But that's exactly what he did. Listen to the prophet Jeremiah. Well, the content of the dream, verses 10, is given in verses 10 to 12. It includes a tree of great height that produces both leaves and fruits. Beasts come under the shade of the tree. Birds live in its branches. And it says there that all flesh was fed from it. Right? That's the imagery. For the most part, that's most of the imagery of it. Verses 13 to 18 is the events of the dream. We'll look at that. Starting verse 13. I saw the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud, said thus, chop down the tree, lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit, lest the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. Amend the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. There's a lot just going on here. First of all, notice we have an actor coming in. Right? You got the tree and the imagery. An actor comes in described as a watcher, a holy one. Now, I'm going to throw, here are some, most of the major translations, even some old ones. I want you to notice how it is. Now, they're going to be very similar, but slightly different. NIV describes a holy one and a messenger. Notice the word watcher isn't there. I think that's on purpose. Doesn't want that language to be confused, is what we'll talk about here in a minute. ESV, New King James, and CSB is Christian Standard Bible, which is what your Lifeway material will use, Sunday school and whatnot. It says the same thing, a watcher, a holy one. The implication here, I believe, is that these are, this is one person, by one being, right? They go by the name watcher, that is a holy one, okay? The New English translation, one of my favorite Bibles, it's a bit strange here, a holy sentinel. I don't know what to do with that. I was really surprised by that. I love the Net Bible, but I'm not a fan of that. A New Living Translation, which is more loose than like NIV's, a thought for thought. A messenger, a holy one, very similar. King James, so we know this one has to be right. A watcher and a holy one, which implies there's two distinct beings here. NASB, very similar to what we saw elsewhere. The Holman Christian Standard Bible, which is now the Christian Standard Bible, and they updated it. So I don't think you can buy a Holman Christian Standard Bible anymore. I don't know. You can ask Lifeway. It used an observer, a watcher. You can see the similarity, but watchers we'll see is a better term. So I'm not a fan of that one. And here's the Geneva Bible from the 16th century, one of the earliest English Bibles we have. The earliest English Bible is the Wycliffe Bible, and I couldn't find, I don't know if he did Daniel or not, John Wycliffe, but that was based off of the Latin translation. So the Geneva Bible predates King James. In fact, the Geneva was a well-received English translation. It's called the Geneva Bible because Bloody Mary kicked out was killing Protestants left and right, hence the name Bloody Mary. And so a bunch of the ministers went down to Geneva where John Calvin was, and they translated the Bible in English. But they didn't just translate the Bible, they added study notes. It's really like the first study Bible in English language, okay? And one of the things they didn't like in the Geneva Bible was the king and or queen, because she's killing them all. And well, when King James, this is free, when King James from Scotland became King James also of England, he wanted to unify the two kingdoms in a new Bible translation is what he did. When that was first published in 1611, no one cared for it because they had a Bible they liked just fine. Sort of like today, if you grew up with King James only people and the NIV came out, we don't need that. We got the King James, right? Same thing. We don't need the King James. We got the Geneva. We don't need the Geneva. We got Wycliffe or Tyndale, right? Anyways, that's free. But you see it uses a watchman and a holy one. Now, why does this matter? You remember a long, long time ago in a land not too far away, we were studying Genesis chapter 6, long time ago. And we came to the passage about the sons of God mixed with the daughters of men, and there were Nephilim in the land. And God got tired of the human race, and so he flooded everybody. It's Noah's Ark. And we struggle with who are the sons of God, who are the daughters of men, what are the Nephilim. I did not know this until this week reading through Daniel 4. The word watchers was a Second Temple Judaism term to describe the Nephilim. Okay? Now, you can get real deep in this stuff and you can chase rabbits and just find things you just would rather not find. But there are non-biblical books that develop who the watchers were, right, in Jewish myth. Enoch, First Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and some others. I did not realize that Daniel has the word for watchers. Now, the question is, are they referencing the same thing or not? The short is, I don't know. But what I do think you have here is this divine being, whatever it is an agent of God, not some other malevolent agent. So I don't know what the connection is with the flood, but I do think it's significant. You have one who is holy, a watcher. Daniel uses that term watcher. It's the only time it's used in the Bible, I believe. But it describes a holy one. So it could be, as the NIV has it here, a messenger. And of course, messenger is what the word angel means. We transliterate angel, but it just means messenger or news, someone who gives news. So the good news, the gospel, has the word good angel in it, right? Because it just means message. So this is me being nerdy here a little bit, and I'm cutting a lot of that stuff, the stuff that I could do. But that this word pops up, and I did not know that at all. I only knew watchers from the perspective of Enoch. So if you watch the so-called History Channel and Ancient Aliens, and they try to prove to you that there are aliens in the Bible, they will mention the watchers. You know, and they'll make watchers fit within the Bible, but this is the only place that word is fine. Well, you'll notice in verse 14 and 15, the watcher orders the chopping down of the tree. And this forces the animals to flee in the dream, and the stump is left with the assumption that it will grow again. And it is now protected by iron and a bronze fence. Now, in verse 16, the scenery changes to that of a man who becomes convinced he is a beast. And he is convinced of this, it says in verse 16, 7 periods of a time. I am told by people much smarter than I that is a reference to 7 years. Most people agree this is a reference to 7 years. Danny, is it 7 years? Okay, it's 7 years, right? Our expert has spoken. Now, I don't know why it's 7 years. there's people smarter than me, and I only have so many hours in a day to figure this out. So I'm going to go with smart people. Not everyone says this. Some say it's an ambiguous time frame. Fine. But most would say this represents a time period of 7 years. So what you have is this person is going to, representing the dream somehow, is now going to think they are a beast for 7 years. And the whole point of this is articulated in verse 17, to the end that the living may know the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. So you see that God is sovereign over the nations. God is sovereign over the rulers of the nations. And there should come out of that humility. Well, in verses 19 to 27, Daniel gives his interpretation. Let's start in verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, in case you couldn't remember that, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream of the interpretation alarm you. Now, this is like a doctor when he first looks at your test results and you're standing right there. That's what Daniel's doing, right? He gets the dream and his eyes get real big. His face gets real pale, right? Because he knows what it means. And you do not deliver bad news to the king, right? You just don't do that. In fact, this is a problem with presidents today. They always talk about that each passing year they become more and more lonely because no one wants to address them as human beings, right? They're the president of the United States. So here's Daniel thinking, I got to give this guy bad news. This could be it for me, right? And he says, the king answered, Belteshazzar, let not the dream interpretation alarm you. He answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you and its interpretation for your enemies. Good cover, right? Right. I'm not saying this is what I want to happen to you. No, I mean, it's going to happen. But I'd rather something else happen. Let this happen to those other guys, that voted against you and didn't support your bill. So verse 20, the tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reached to the heavens, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. Well, where's the bad news? Right? I mean, this is all good news. I mean, Daniel says, look, that whole imagery of the tree, where you get the birds coming in and resting in the branches, where beasts are resting in the shade. And these imageries found all over the Bible, right? The shade tree and stuff, Zechariah 3, you'll find this about Messianic kingdom, that we will find rest under the shade of the branch, right? The Messianic branch. So this image is all over the Bible. And Daniel, I was picking up on this. And he says, look, the interpretation is, you're the tree that is great and mighty. And because of that, people come and they find rest under mighty Babylon. Now, this isn't unusual when it comes to empire. Now, the Bible is not positive when it comes to empire, but there are good parts of empire. For example, the Pax Romana, right, the peace of Rome that Rome enjoyed under Caesar Augustus, allowed, historians have seen, the propagation of the gospel to spread at incredible rates. Well, because you have a large empire made up of a variety of nations with connected roads that were safe, for most part safe. You can go by sea, you can go by land. It was safe. So travel was good. You didn't worry about barbarians coming in. You didn't have to worry about crossing over various nations to complicate things. No. So the gospel just spread like wildfires, right? And this is true of all empires, right? The American empire right now. Think about, I think we're seeing this with inflation, gas prices, and the cost of everything. Anytime there is war or the threat of war, everything gets knocked off, right? But when we don't have that, we have a period of peace, economies boom. Inflation is somewhat down, right? Jobs are there and wages go up, right? There's this relative peace that allows things to be discovered, inventions to be made, things to be passed around, new ideas to spread. And that's true of empire. Now, empire is mostly bad. Read the book of Revelation. But there is good in them. So you have Babylon as a wicked nation, right? Wicked empire. But they have allowed, through their work, to bring in a period of stability and peace. Stability and peace is important for the flourishing of mankind. So here Daniel, he says, here's the good news. You're the tree. And look at all the good things here. Because the beast wouldn't have shade if it wasn't for you. The birds wouldn't have nests if it wasn't for you. You are great, you're mighty, the tree is touching the heavens. But there's always a but, isn't there, right? Thank you, Doc, I'm going to move it. Sort of like, poking the belly, saying you lose weight. Like, you could have stopped at, you're in pretty good health, right? And didn't have to poke me, right? You can stop at that first part. We'll start in verse 23. We get some of the bad news. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree, destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven, let his portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, you shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. Now that's the bad news. Right now, you're that tall tree. But the Lord, the God of the Jews, is going to chop you down. You're going to be tempted to think that you've built all this and that nothing can stop you and your empire is too powerful. In an instant, the tree will fall. Like I referenced, we got another large branch in our backyard, the second in less than a month. It doesn't take much for a mighty tree to fall. It doesn't take much for a mighty empire to fall. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, it's that like that, the whole world can shut down. And everything that comes from that. I remember the meetings we had here with staff and deacons and other leaders about everything. Now what do we do? What does this mean short-term and long-term for the church, for our community, for jobs, for economy, for food? Those were scary conversations. One day everything was fine. The next day all of a sudden everything was shut down. It doesn't take much to chop down a tree, especially when the Lord is involved. So what he does starting in verse 26 is he wants to give counsel to the king. So he doesn't just say, this is going to happen, too bad. But he gives counsel towards the king. And as it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed. There may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. You see he's a preacher now. He's a prophet. Here it is the temptation is you'll see yourself as a tree, but you won't see yourself as the Lord's tree. And so your ego will become so great, the Lord will chop you down. By the way, he'll do the same thing to Herod in the book of Acts. The minute everyone said, this is the voice of a God, Herod didn't say, slow down that train like woe. Rather, he accepts it, right? Because it's good publicity with the election year coming up. And God says, today is the day. This comes to an end. So Daniel warns that Nebuchadnezzar is under God's divine judgment, so much so he will send a watcher, whoever that might be, a holy one, to chop him down. One of the things that stuck out to me, I was reading this in more depth today. Does this story sound familiar? Can you think of a story where something reaches the heavens and the nations seem to gather under its shade and its ego seems to reach the heavens along with it? But God comes down and says, you think you are great and mighty, but I will tear you down. That story sound familiar? Here's the kicker. One is the Tower of Babylon. The other is the tree of Babylon. It's the same story. Remember when I said that Daniel was preparing us for the Messiah, and rightly so. He's also connecting us to everything we've seen coming before. We see the story of Joseph over and over again, we've shown. But it's also the story of humanity. That Babel of old is still Babel of today. It's a story of empire. It's a story of mankind. He keeps thinking he can ascend to the heavens. And that's going to be Nebuchadnezzar's fall, because that is humanity's fall. And so with the fall of Nebuchadnezzar will eventually come the fall of the Babylonian Empire. It'll take a little longer than this. Well, let's look briefly at, that's Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Let's look at his degradation in verses 28 to 37. We'll start in verse 28. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. King answered and said, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" Now, pause there, because I suspect we have an idea where this is going. The dream sort of ruined the spoiler alert, the dream ruined it for us. But I'll just pause and say, is he correct? Did Nebuchadnezzar build this great and mighty kingdom? Yeah, he did. Quite impressive. It's going to be a long time to do this, so you're going to have to sit through this. Let me tell you a little bit about ancient Babylon. First of all, the Greek historian Herodotus says Babylon was adorned in a manner surpassing any city we are acquainted with. Let's start with the walls of Babylon, right? Here is an archaeological discovery of the walls of Babylon. They cover 11 miles. There's an inner wall and an outer wall. They measure 350 feet tall. Right? No bulldozers or anything like that. That is tall. And remember, you have an outside wall. So if you pierce through it, you got to go through the inside wall. But the reason you want two walls is, you want to defend the outside wall. If they make it inside, you got archers and soldiers on two walls. And the space is wide enough to allow a 4-horse chariot to turn around, right? So there's a great space here. But you're also, it's just shooting fish in a barrel at this point. So it's very secure. I think I've got that up there. By the way, we found this from a German archaeologist, discovered this. The tower was there was a tower about every 65 feet. So now you have garrisons set up to protect the city. It's going 11 miles around. 20 meters outside the outer wall was a moat that drew water from the Euphrates. That's very, very important, right? This is Helm's Deep here. You have to have a water source to keep people from dying of starvation and dehydration, right? You're in Babylon, middle of the Middle East here. There are 9 gates. You have to go through 9 gates. So much like Helm's Deep of Two Towers, Lord of the Rings, is you may enter through the first gate. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. But if you want to reach the heart of the city, you got 8 more to go. And how many soldiers did you lose just to knock down that one gate? Right? It's very fortified, very protective. Each one is named after certain Babylonian gods and goddesses. Well, that's just the walls. One of the 9 gates is known as the Ishtar Gate. And this is still standing, still blue. That is it right there. You can see how tall it is. I tried to pick a picture with some tourists. You can see how tall it is. If you've watched The Eternals, the Marvel movie, not recommending it, but just saying, The Eternals includes the Ishtar Gate. This is from ancient Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is the one who put it together. Ishtar was one of the gods of Babylon. It's decorated with animals molded onto both glazed and unglazed bricks. Seems pretty impressive. The street is over 60 feet in width. In some parts, and used during New Year's festivals, passing a major civics building. As we'll see, one of his palaces is right inside of that gate. Alexander the Great had intended to use Babylon with the Ishtar Gate as its capital city. Of course, he died before he was able to do that. That's the Ishtar Gate, and there's more to say about that. I would love to see this in person. I just don't want to go to Iraq right now. Then there's the main palace. Again, you just go right inside. Is an archaeological find of one of his palaces. It is 13 acres. 13 acres. Just my lands. You could do some hunting on 13 acres, I guarantee it. It included royal quarters. I don't know if I have all this up here. Royal quarters, garrisons, storage rooms, staterooms, administrative workplaces, and plenty of space for his wife's shoes, I'm sure. South of one of the 3 courtyards, there you go. You can see the dimensions there. Excavators found an adjoining throne room. You can see its size. Entered through 3 portals with walls and columns covered in glazed bricks of browns, yellows, blues, and black. Colors are pretty standard for us. Not so standard back then. They were a sign of wealth. Blues and purples in particular were seen as a sign of royalty. All right. Then there are the temple precincts. This is part of the Ishtar Gate, by the way. We don't have much on the temples. Over 40 temples. I've seen different numbers, some over 50. So do this whatever you want in terms of specific numbers. They're found throughout the city. Only a few have been excavated so far. One is the whatever. It's the center of the city, cult to Marduk and other gods, rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar, decorated with gold. Another one, I'm not going to even try to pronounce it. It's north of where the remains of a ziggurat are found. Does this sound familiar? Ziggurats usually consisted of 6-step platforms with a shrine of Marduk at the top. It actually informs our understanding of the Tower of Babel. Its square base was 300 feet to each side with a series of 6 levels, each level smaller than one before. Each level may have been a different color. That would have been my wife's idea. Temple of Marduk, again at the top of the ziggurat, would have to take a flight of stairs to enter the temple. Total height was about 300 feet, 7 floors. The annex of the Capitol is 4 floors. That's technically 5. So it's taller than the annex of the Capitol. So basically our state capitol is what you're going to look at, this ziggurat. And then there are the hanging gardens. Now, it is debatable if they actually existed. I don't know if you looked at this, Lonnie, is that the only evidence we have come from the Greeks and Romans. And so it could be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that didn't exist. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I can only use what resources I have to share this with you. One story is he built it to give his wife air conditioning. I just find that great. Another is that his wife's from a foreign land and missed some of the the plants and whatnot from that, so he had them brought and built this garden. Gardens were typical of kings. We've talked about this before, understanding the Garden of Eden. David would have been wandering around his garden when he saw Bathsheba. Much of Song of Solomon we saw last week takes place in a king's garden. Anyways, so it is believed that it would have taken 8,000 gallons of water every day to keep the plants watered. It's called the hanging gardens, but it's really they're hanging over like the wall. So if you see pictures of it, it depicts that. Gardens were 75 feet tall, and waters. So basically, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians had to invent a new irrigation system just to keep the plants watered. I don't like landscaping. This is a job I would not want. Okay. Well, as you can imagine, all of this would have made Nebuchadnezzar quite a proud man. So let's just pause. He says, look at all I've done. And in one sense, he did do all that. He's the one who's general that conquered everything. And it's very rare you'll find a king who is a good general and a good politician. Much like presidents, many of them are good campaigners, but not good leaders. Or they're really good leaders and not good campaigners. It's hard to find both. Nebuchadnezzar was both a good general and he was a good king. Now, evil, obviously, but in terms of what he was able to accomplish is impressive. But here's the problem, is that when we think it was my ingenuity and my skills, my gifts, my calling that did all this, without crediting the one who has truly blessed us, then we've moved from the realm of faithfulness to idolatry. And here is the height of idolatry, and it is human pride. Right here. He gives himself all the credit. And so you see there in verse 30, the king answered and said, again, it's not this great, right? And the answer is of course, yes, he did do all this. And you notice the eyes. I made Babylon great. I conquered the nations. I've become greater than my father. I did this all on my own. That's the problem with it. I think I got a Lewis quote up here. It's always good to have C.S. Lewis. According to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of the mind. When I was a youth, we used to debate what is the root of all sin. And we came down to 2 conclusions. And I think they're 2 sides of the same coin. Pride and selfishness. I think it's 2 sides of the same coin. I think it's true. Remember that John tells us it's the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, that every temptation is going to come from at least one of those 3 categories. But pride is right there at the core of it, isn't it? And so you get, starting in verse 31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, this will be carried on by Herod Antipas and axe, right? He gets eaten by worms, which is Wild. There fell a voice from heaven, likely from the watcher or from God himself. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. The tree is being chopped. And you shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers. His nails were like birds' claws. Now, this is interesting. This is a real condition that people are diagnosed with. Anyone grow up with werewolf stories? You ever like a good werewolf story? I thought about like picking a few for you, right? But I ain't got that much time on my hands, and I don't want this to get weird. But this is a real condition known as lycanthropy, or literally Wolfman disease. It's the mental condition where the individual believes they are an animal of some type. And there are people around right now. It's a very rare condition. Although, I say rare, spend enough time on social media, if there isn't enough attention for you to deny your biological gender, you can always pretend to be a different biological species, right? That's becoming. So a lot of public schools are dealing with people acting like they're dogs or something, bark at each other. I mean, what a weird world we live. How come God hasn't just lit us all on fire and be done with us? Good night. Whew, take the internet with them. But anyways, so this is a real condition. But the point is that this will be your condition until you are brought so low that you are humbled to extol God. Now, I think that is a huge and important point for us to see. Everyone, and what I've seen in life is that everyone seems to have a different rock bottom. I've shared with you before that when I first lost 20 pounds, I need to lose about 30 now, is I hit a certain number on the scale that I didn't like. That was my rock bottom. I've since learned it's a little lower than that, but that was my rock bottom. For some, it may have taken another 200 pounds to get there. I don't know. But we all have different rock bottoms, but it's still a rock bottom. And here, Nebuchadnezzar, who is so high, his rock bottom has to be so low. But this is an act of grace. This judgment is an act of grace. For he will not be a good king unless he is a humbled king. Read the Old Testament, that the best kings of Israel were humble kings. David was a great king until his pride got in his way. And as we'll see on Sunday mornings, it starts to unravel for him. Well, real quickly, verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praise and honor him who lives forever. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. He does according to his will among the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? I want you to read that slowly, will you? Is your God this big? Read it again. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. If that's true, American evangelicals, we should start acting like it. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. That God's kingdom will be here 1,000 years if the Lord tarries. Isn't that good news? You think the Jews need to hear that at this point? They're all scattered around the earth. They need to know the kingdom of God endures from generation to generation. Of course, what's happening in the time of Daniel is soon to be, at least when we get there in chapter 6 Sunday evening, is Nehemiah and Ezra and Haggai and Zechariah. They're all marching to Zion. And they're rebuilding the city. Daniel isn't involved in that. Esther isn't involved in that. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. This is taken, I believe, straight from Isaiah. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, yet we believe we are everything. Isn't that humbling to think? You're nothing compared to God. Which is the beauty of the gospel, that he would stoop down to nothing. Isn't that incredible? And he does according to his will among the host of heaven. There's the divine council, divine beings, like watchers and holy ones, angels. He does whatever it is he wants with them. He'll send them. He'll tell them to stay. And they will do his bidding because he's the sovereign Lord. I'm willing to bet you have no problem with that right there, do you? Of course, angels do whatever it is God tells them to do. By the way, that's the demonic world as well. They do his bidding, and nothing is outside of his sovereign control. This is why Christ can walk in and say, I think you're done here. Go hang out with the pigs and drown, Legion. He's sovereign over the supernatural world. But notice what he says after that. And he is sovereign among the inhabitants of the earth. Here's the thing. We're okay with God being sovereign over the likes of Nebuchadnezzar so long as he isn't sovereign over the likes of you and me, right? We struggle with that part of this passage. He's Lord over you and me. It'd be nice if we start acting like it, shouldn't we? And none can stay his hand, and none can say to him, what are you doing? Because who are you? You're as nothing. And here he is. He stoops down to us. It's an incredible story, And so he says that his reason come to him. Now, this is interesting. One last point, and then we'll call it a night. I got a long night ahead of me. Chapter 4 opens up with a poem where Nebuchadnezzar is praising the Lord Most High. It ends with Nebuchadnezzar writing a poem where he's extolling the Lord Most High. It's amazing, isn't it, how quickly we can go from one, where God is everything, God is great, God is wonderful, just give me Jesus. Before long, we've replaced Jesus with ourselves. Sin at its core is our best effort to dethrone a sovereign Savior, Lord. And so Nebuchadnezzar has to be humbled yet again. I'm willing to bet many of us need to hear that. But the good news is this act of judgment was an act of grace. Because now he's learned yet again who God is in his essence. And that's always a good lesson for us to learn. Danny, did I miss anything? It's good stuff, ain't it? Good stuff. Did you know watchers were mentioned in Daniel 4? I've read through Daniel 1,000 times. Never noticed it. All right. Okay, well,